When we think about the Christmas story in the Bible, we often think about the beginning chapters of Matthew, the beginning chapters of Luke. But I think there's an important truth that's found in the book of Romans in the 8th chapter that we could say is part of or rooted in the Christmas story. And that's where Paul, as he's writing to the Roman Christians, says, "He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things?" And when you think about that idea of Jesus being delivered over by God, I think our initial thought is the cross, which is certainly true. That was the purpose of him coming. But before that happened, God delivered Jesus over to humanity. God delivered Jesus over to a woman to carry in her womb, to give birth to feed and nurture. God delivered Jesus over to a man who would raise him as his own son, even though he knew he was not his biological father. God delivered him over to a city where there was taxation and foreign government there kind of taking over the place, and where there were people bustling around and where he wouldn't necessarily be welcomed. God delivered him over to having to flee from a king who was jealous and looked to kill him even while he was a toddler. God delivered Jesus over initially at his birth, as Jesus left his Father's side in heaven and came down to earth. God delivered him over to live his life in a way that would reflect God's character, that we would be able to see God more clearly, to understand his nature, and that we would be able to understand that there is help for us. There is a God who is with us, Emmanuel. God delivered him over to teach us about the ways of his kingdom, the things that are important to God. God delivered him over to have friends that one of whom would eventually betray him, and all of whom would desert him in his hour of greatest need. And when we think about that, Paul's point is, if God did that, won't he also give us all things? Now, that doesn't mean that we can give God a list. I'd like one of those cyber trucks, and I'd like a new bicycle, and I'd like a new house. And it doesn't mean that God is a great Santa Claus in the sky. But it does mean that we can trust him to provide for our needs. We can trust him to give us the strength for our day. We can trust him to give us wisdom for decisions that we need to make. We can trust him for protection. We can trust him to develop in us his character. We can trust the promises of his word, because they are all rooted in a God who loves us enough, or so much, not just enough, that he delivered over. He didn't spare his own son. He didn't say, "No, you can't go. You can't go die for those people. Stay here with me." God, with open hands, extended his greatest gift to us. And so today, whatever you're going through, I would encourage you to think about the love that God has for you. I would encourage you to think about the God who didn't spare his own son. And then I would encourage you to trust him for whatever your needs are today.